Oh, you got her, dude. She's down. Let's go.
Dude, I just shot a deer of a lifetime.
Freaking smoked him.
One with nature, and if you're a believer, one with God.
Definitely gets your heart pumping. Boy, you are in trouble.
Fall Obsession Podcast.
All right, guys, welcome back. Thanks for joining us for another week of our Fall Obsession Podcast. Excited for you guys to be tuning in with us again this week. I am Sam with Fall Obsession, your podcast host. Hope you guys have enjoyed some recent week's episodes. We've been talking to several hunters across the country about some of their own tactics and whitetail management styles, if you will, in their respective areas, and we're kind of jumping back into that topic of conversation again this week with our guest. The season is upon us, so it's a good time to be talking about some whitetail hunting and getting folks pumped up. I'm joined by our very own field staffer, Mr. Tyler Wolf, this week. Tyler, welcome to Fall Obsession Podcast.
Thanks, Sam. Appreciate the opportunity to bring me on.
Well, we're happy to have you on, man. I know we got a lot of good stuff in store, talking about some big whitetails in your area this week. But before we get into our conversation, I want to give a quick shout out, as we have been doing, to our friends over at Elite Archery. We're very happy to be partnered with a company like Elite for this year and running their bows as our primary setups. I know I've been enjoying my cure from last year and looking forward to having a remedy in my hand this year. Really good bows, really high quality equipment. So if you guys haven't gone to your local dealer, go check them out. Take the Elite Shootability Challenge and see if they're right for you. You got to get it in your hand yourself and see what you think for yourself and develop your own opinion. And that's all that Elite wants. They're confident their equipment will do the rest. So be sure to go check them out at your local dealer and at EliteArchery.com. Well, Tyler, I'm going to kind of direct it over to you real quick, give you the opportunity to introduce yourself, maybe give a little background on yourself and your whitetail hunting outdoor experience, and then we'll get into today's conversation talking about some of the stuff that you're doing on your own property to grow big whitetails.
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, I mean, as it kind of goes, I'm a Kansas man through and through, born and raised in middle of Kansas. Stayed here pretty much my entire life thus far. Grew up a farm boy out in what I'd call near the Flint Hills, but close enough to the plains where you could see some flatness. So really grew up in the upland, hunting space, dove, migratory birds. Obviously we have Cheyenne Bottoms near where I grew up, and so there's a lot of good migratory waterfowl in terms of that aspect of it. In terms of whitetail, my experience there is a little more recent in my life. I've moved out to big city of Kansas City, and the upland game is not as dominant out here, so I transitioned to something to keep me outdoors, and that was whitetail. And as all bow hunters know, bow hunting is the best way to approach whitetail hunting, not just because of the length of the season, but because of the intimacy that you get when you're out there hunting those animals. So been doing that for the better part of the decade, and I'm now progressed into managing my own little herd on a small little property. So
Awesome. So we don't want anybody to give away their secrets or their specific locations or anything like that, but give us what information you're comfortable giving about just the property and kind of the dynamics of the land that you manage.
Sure, absolutely. So it is in Kansas, near where I live, obviously, within driving range. So that's nice to help me get my hands on it more often than not. It's not some 4-hour drive away that I have to plan a weekend around. So I can make quick trips out there, whether that's, a little upkeep or, smaller tasks. It's a rolling property with a small water source, and that side is a creek. It's got a nice mix of conifers and some pasture, and I got some food plots in there as well. So it's kind of a all around mix. It's not the largest property in the world, but it's pretty diverse in terms of its habitat, and it served me well, honestly. So it's a good little spot.
That's awesome. And I know we'll get into it more later, but you have a lot of pictures on our social media lately that you've sent in of some really, really awesome looking whitetails out there. So whatever you're doing is working, and that's what we're going to get into today with you. So, but I know you had mentioned when we were kind of pre-gaming right before we started, you know, how being a conservationist and having that mindset is the priority. That's what comes first for managing a successful whitetail herd. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that with as far as it goes for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and as we talked about, you know, one comes in front of the other, right? You know, in order to be a good hunter, especially on your own property, or even, you know, on property that you manage, creating that habitat, creating that wildlife habitat, a diverse wildlife habitat, is not just better for animals in general, but it's better for your herd. So if you put that conservationist element first and really protect the land, be a steward of the land, you will reap the rewards as a hunter. And you know, ultimately, we're out there to have fun hunting. But I tell you what, that land steward stuff is pretty exciting as well. So just a philosophy, I would say, from my perspective, and it's not an uncommon one, right? It's relatively common across the hunting world, but I like to adhere to it as much as possible.
Absolutely, 100% agree. So, as I already alluded to, you have some really good genetics and some good deer that on your place that you're hunting. But where did it all start? Have you always had a good caliber of whitetail, or has it been something you've had to work with for a while now to establish?
It is a naturally good spot. I'll say that, you know, when you say, for example, if you're buying a house, it's got good bones, right? So this one definitely had good bones. And then just some minor tweaks here and there, right? Directing traffic with structure or trails. Creating nice bedding areas, creating a food source, creating, I'll call the main food source, something that they could really dig into on a regular basis, as well as little treats, you know, here and there to kind of guide their paths throughout your property. And just bolstered it as much as possible. And then, of course, you know, herd management, right? You got to make sure you have the nice mix between does and bucks, and if you got bad genes in there, you know, find a buddy, come in there and take out that buck so you don't ruin your tag, right? But, you know, just kind of being picky about what you do and keeping a good eye on the entire herd. So, but I'll go back to the beginning there. I was really lucky because the place has good bones. It's not surrounded by a lot of hunters. It's not surrounded by a lot of ag fields. There is some, but all in all, it's overall good habitat, and I got a nice little chunk of it right in the middle.
Very cool. That's awesome. So talking a little bit more specifically about some of the stuff that you've done this year or last year, however far back you want to go, what are specific things that you try to do on your property to maintain or support the good genetics that you have, and then also just to keep the deer coming back, to keep the deer there where you want them?
I'll start with the latter one. That seems to be a bit easier, and in terms of, you know, how you approach a property. I like to have a 5-year plan, and so year one is more observation, right? Maybe some low-hanging fruit in terms of improvement, whether that's small timber stand improvement, right? Clearing out some of those smaller trees, letting the sun hit the ground a little bit, create some of that natural forage for the animals so they'll frequent your spot a little bit more. Creating natural yet protected travel corridors. I've made a number of those throughout the property so that deer can traverse through while feeling secure doing it. I think that's, as we all know, you know, deer are, you know, naturally skittish animals, right? And if you can provide them any level of security, that's going to improve their health and as well as the frequency of their visits. So security is always at the top of my mind when I'm creating whether openings or travel corridors, making sure that it's not just some opening that I'm creating. I'm giving them a nice path from A to B while feeling protected, maybe even have a back door out. So that's one of the main things that I work on. And honestly, that's the hardest thing to work on, because unless you've got a, skid steer with some amazing implements, you're in there with a chainsaw or a brush cutter getting to work. And that's also one of the most rewarding parts of it. That's the first thing, in terms of low-hanging fruit, and also observations, right? I take diligent notes that first year. Where am I seeing deer? I move cameras all over the place. I run about 4 on there now, but I move them around, seeing where they're frequent, where they come in from, where they exit to, understanding what times they eat, when they don't eat, what they don't eat. You just kind of record all that. And then year 2 is you expand upon your plan a little bit. You move beyond the low-hanging fruit and move into a little more of a structured approach, whether that's more of a blocking mechanism. Say, for example, we cut those trails early on, but we still see some variation in their use of those trails. You can start putting blockers in, something as rudimentary as a barbed wire fence, to just encourage them to go one way or the other, and while maintaining security, of course. But anyways, more concrete, more substantial adjustments to the property based upon your observations in year 1. And then, of course, it's iterative at that point, right? You take a project, you implement it, you monitor the results. If the results are satisfactory or what you expected, then good. You can keep piling on to that particular element of your property. If you don't get the results you want, maybe you pull back and try something different, right? So it's a feedback loop at that point. You understand what you're trying to accomplish and put something in place and test it out and measure it.
Absolutely. Very cool. So at what you mentioned your 5-year plan and everything, and you've gone through that. What stage would you consider yourself at right now?
Well, I had some early iterations, so I'd say I'm probably still in year 1 observation stage at this point. I'm not trying to extend my plan too long, but I'll just say I have a vision, and I probably shouldn't call it a 5-year plan. Honestly, it's a vision of where I want the property to be. But as you know, once you get into these things and you bring outside factors such as wildlife into it, right? You never know how it's going to progress. So I'm taking some more substantial moves in terms of food plots. I'm expanding my large food plot to get a little more around forage in there. I'm carving some additional trails based upon the bedding that I've been seeing and trees and exits that I've been seeing. But again, I'm still keeping it relatively light at this point. I'm not clearing any tree stands, if I'll put it that way. Gotcha.
So you mentioned that you're working on your food plots and everything like that. What kind of stuff specifically are you planting, and summer crops versus fall crops? What does that look like for you on your property?
Yeah, I maintain 2 small to medium-sized clover plots, and I pretty much run those year-round. Right, they're established, they're frequented, and then they're good hunting spots. Honestly, I don't want to mess with those. They're just my year-round go-to clover plots. On a larger plot, I run a combination of, I'll do a grass during off seasons just to kind of build up my soil a little bit, and then in the fall I'll do a blend that is it's kind of a varied release blend that will sprout early. It has multiple different seeds within it, and they all germinate in different times to kind of give you this diverse time range of optimal food for the deer. It also maintains their attractiveness to it after the hunting season, so that once you've done major mess through the hunting season, the deer will come back and start to again enjoy your property as a food source for them. In terms of what I plant, I try everything. Like I said, I'm trying the fall release blend this year, but I've definitely tried some others. Other blends, mostly blends, because I like to have the diversity in terms of the food source, because what's palatable at one point, will not always remain that way. So soybeans, for example, right, they're going to kind of drop out of favor right around rut here in Kansas. So I stay away from those, but I will use those early in the season for good forage. So.
Gotcha. Very cool. So you've been talking about, still being somewhat in that observatory stage with where you're at with your own property and your whitetail herd. I wanted to get into a little bit on just some buck-to-doe ratios and kind of start that off by seeing maybe what your buck-to-doe ratio, in your opinion, is right now, because especially with smaller properties, I know that can change, that can kind of affect success year to year. It's a little bit more difficult with smaller properties. I don't know specifically how big your land is, but what can you tell us about the buck-to-doe ratio and how that affects hunting?
That's a great question. I think it does. It affects the long-term viability of your genetics, especially if you want to kind of focus on, a wall hanger, right? I would say for me specifically, I probably got a little heavy on the buck side, just because I'm not getting enough replication of a specific genetic type that I want to see in there. There's too much competition, or maybe too much opportunity.
Yeah.
Somebody else will sneak in there. But you're absolutely right. If you're too heavy on the does, obviously it's difficult to grow up a stud, right? Because you want to fill your tag every year. If you're too heavy on the bucks, you get too much diversity in terms of the gene pool. That's one of the things I'm focused on this year. In Kansas, I'm sure you guys know, you only get one buck tag per person per year. So I'm literally buying my wife a crossbow and say, hey, come out here and shoot this spike, because I want them out of my herd, right? So, but yeah, you have to constantly, I don't know a better way to do that other than what you got, and adjust accordingly based upon what you can find. And I'm just in a tricky spot here because of the one tag thing. My boys aren't into hunting yet, so I got to get them going.
Yeah, I hear you. So right now, what does your property look like for shooter bucks? And again, I don't want you to give anything away you're not comfortable with, but obviously that one buck tag, that's all you got. And if you have multiple mature bucks on there, that I know that you got to pick and choose at that point. But
yeah, right. Yeah, I think in October, maybe early November, I'll be picky and choosy. I might get less so as the season goes on. You know how that goes. But question, I think what I'll do is I'll pick out a few. I'll pick out a handful that I'll say, hey, your potentials, and depending upon the time and my mood at the time, I might let an arrow fly, I may not. I will look at potential, right? Where do I see this deer going? Are they a 3.5-year-old, a 4.5-year-old? I mean, even though a 3.5-year-old might have the best set of horns out there, I'm not sure that, he'll be at the top of my list this year, because if he's got, a couple more years of growth to where he could really reach his potential, he might fall down the list. Not saying I won't throw an arrow at him, but, definitely consider that when I'm looking at him through the scope, or not through the scope, obviously, but through the bow.
Right. So when the rut rolls around, you're talking about having a more buck-heavy buck-to-doe ratio, it seems. When the rut rolls around, how does that change, or does it?
It does a little bit, because obviously you have a little more travel, right? There's bucks are going to start venturing around, and where they had traveled prior to that, you never really know if they're going to show up or not. So, as you know, right, rut's about just getting your butt in the stand and staying there for as long as possible. But it's a fine balance. You're right. How do you optimize your opportunity for that shooter, the one you want, versus walking away or nearing the end of your season and still yet to fill a tag. So that's why I'll definitely have a list of 5 or so, and I'll just prioritize them and based upon the opportunities I get, as the season progresses, I'll make that decision. But it's definitely going to be a game time decision. Yeah. Maybe some new guy shows up. You never know.
Yeah, that's true. So going back a little bit just to you're talking about making that list and prioritizing your deer when you only have one buck tag yourself to work with. In your opinion, what is a shooter buck? Because different people, different places say different things. Some people say a deer with certain qualities at 4.5 could be, or you need to wait till 5.5. In your opinion, what makes a shooter buck?
That's a great question. I'd like to say that any buck that puts meat on the table is a shooter for me, but that's just not the way I am. That's not the way I'm geared, and a lot of us aren't, right?
Right.
So if I'm looking at that and I want to maximize potential, I would say probably 4.5 would be a bare minimum for me. But then again, if I've got a handful of 3.5ers, all three of them with great potential, I'll probably knock out the smallest one, right? The one that doesn't have the best potential, and let those other two expand into 4.5-year territory. Something that I would be proud enough to put on a wall. I think that's kind of where I, justify the size and the scope there. But I would say 4.5 is kind of where I would draw that line.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I know it comes into effect too, just where you're at and what you have. You, as you mentioned, have a very unique situation, and you have good genetics, you have good deer, and you have the ability to be able to pick and choose. Whereas some guys out there, it might be, they might not just have that option. It might be more of a meat on the table type stance, and that's not a bad stance to have. I don't want to be an advocate for shooting young or baby deer or anything like that, but there's plenty of meat hunters out there, and that's ultimately a big reason that we do this. But when you have big deer, it's nice to be able to have that true management mindset of being able to keep those genetics to the best quality they can possibly be. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've hunted public land, and I get it. If you see a good size 8 roll through on public, and it's hard not to say that's a shooter, right?
Mm-hmm. So any memorable bucks or hunts in particular out on your place in recent seasons?
I have a couple of bucks that are just really unique. One called Turkey Foot, and he's actually got somebody in the genetic line out there that also has the same kind of antlers, but on the right side, it's just a little tripod of antlers. It's very interesting. It's something I've watched him grow up, and it's really interesting to see the diversity in his antlers. So that's a kind of a fun story for me. And then another one, again, another duplicate out there, but he's got this unicorn on the left side, kind of prodding off in the front, which you wouldn't think would be genetic, but sure as heck, there's a couple of them out there. One's a little bit smaller than the other one, but that little third horn coming out the front there is very interesting, and it's somebody I'd like to see on the wall someday. Let's say Turkey Foot and a unicorn are probably at the top of my list right now, but we'll see. We'll see how they keep expanding in terms of that antler uniqueness.
What about any hunts that you've had out there, any deer you've taken in the past?
Yeah, there's one. It's a bittersweet story. I did a lot of prep work, scouting, and I got, kind of waited my time. I essentially left the property pretty barren for a month and a half to reduce my footprint in there, right? Reduce my smell, and I set aside a weekend. I was like, I'm gonna hit it hard this weekend. And I rolled out there, after a month and a half of not hunting, letting the place kind of simmer, and I had a couple, good sized bucks that were on my list, and I was hoping to see them obviously that weekend. But I rolled out there, And about 20 minutes after daylight, brand new, never before seen buck with a nice little drop tine rolls through me, just munching on acorns, and I let it fly, and I got him, which is, again, as you know, right, when you feel your tag, your last tag, you're kind of bittersweet there, and not to mention it was one that I had never seen before. So as we talked about earlier, right, bucks travel during the rut. This guy definitely did, and came into my spot at the wrong time. Great little story, though. He, in terms of how that hunt went down, again, he was about 25 yards away, munched on acorns, didn't know a thing was coming. Darted him, right, good shot, right in the lungs. At least, obviously, it feels that way, right? It's in the rush of the moment. It's hard to know without a camera to go back and replay, but he ran forward about 50 yards, stopped, looked around a little bit, and then fell. And of course, I felt great, right? At that point, I'm pumping the air, and it's a great experience. About 5 minutes later, I'm just sitting up there, after texting my wife saying, "Hey, I got one." I see him get up, and he starts walking off, and I just go into absolute freak out mode, right? I'm like, "Oh no, maybe I hit him too far back. Maybe I missed him, or whatever the case is." So I tiptoed around for about 5 minutes, and then I just said, I'm going to pull out. And I went out, had some breakfast, hung around for about 5-6 hours, just nervous as all heck, right? You know how you get in those situations.
Mm-hmm.
Where you just, you're fearing for the worst, but hoping for the best. Eventually went back out there, slowly retraced my steps, and getting prepared for a long, blood trail, or a difficult one, needless to say. And I rolled through and got to about where he had stood back up, and sure as heck, he was about 5 feet away. He started walking, but couldn't make another 5 feet. So I was worried, sick for about a half a day for no reason. If I just looked a little bit harder before I bailed on the place, that would have been a better day for me. But it ended up being great anyways.
Yeah. Man, yeah, that is a sickening feeling right there. I know most of us have been there to not know, and it just, the unknown kills you.
It does. Makes you want to start drinking at 8:30 in the morning.
One of the few things that can, I guess. Well, Tyler, I really appreciate everything that you've gone into and talked about with your unique situation out there in Kansas. A really cool property that you're doing good things with and managing some good deer. So, been happy hearing about that and some of the stuff that you're doing out there. One other thing I wanted to hit on, though, kind of related, kind of going to a little bit different topic. You've written a few articles now for us and fallobsession.com, but that does by no means make up your experience as an outdoor educational writer, basically. You want to talk a little bit about just kind of your experience in that world and where people might be able to go to find some of your articles?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up. It's not my day job, obviously. I work in the business world, and so obviously I'm a passionate outdoors writer or passionate outdoorsman that loves to share it with others as well as my other talents. And one of those talents, obviously, being writing. And so difficult to get started, obviously, in that space, especially if you don't have any experience being an outdoors writer. But I was able to get in a few spots. I think my first article was published at bowhunting.com. Brody Swisher reached out and gave me a chance. Wrote a couple articles on spec, and he took some and posted them. And then obviously we expanded it, and now written some for Fall Obsession. So it's a rewarding experience because, as much as we know as hunters, when you really put it down on paper, it shows you the lack of in-depth understanding of the different elements that are involved in the outdoor world. So it's really broadened my horizons on that sense, and I hope through my writing, I was able to do that for others as well. So it's been rewarding for me, that's for sure.
That's awesome. Well, again, we definitely appreciate you writing for Fall Obsession in that capacity, and having we're proud to have some of your articles on our website. They're top notch. They're very well written, obviously, if with the experience and where you've been writing for before and everything. So a couple that our folks can go check out that I know are on there. You did write one back in May, or sent it to us on approaching a recreational land purchase. That is on our website, fallobsession.com. And then you also wrote one for us as it's relevant to turkey hunting, and kind of talking about some turkey hunting numbers and results from this previous spring season. So both of those are great articles that I encourage you guys to go check out. And you're also working on kind of a collaboration, my understanding is, with some of our other staffers on just whitetail hunting in the Midwest, and I'm looking forward to see where that goes. So
yeah, it should be a very good educational piece. I think there's a lot of good information, a lot of broad diversity of hunters, right, that are going to be contributing to this one. So
heck yeah, I'm looking forward to reading it. Well, man, before I cut you loose, this is your first time joining us on our Fall Obsession podcast, and we got a couple questions that we like to hit our first time guests with, if you're good to do that before we hang it up.
Absolutely.
So the first one is, what is your favorite or most memorable hunting memory? And tell us a little bit about it.
Well, this is going to be old school here, but like I said, I grew up upland hunting out in central Kansas, and my brother and I didn't have shotguns at the time. All we had was BB guns, but through those BB guns and a combined effort, we were able to snag a dove out of a tree, which I don't know if it was luck or what, but that was a fun time for both of us little boys out there, just sitting in the grass, pumping those BB guns over and over and over. Just, we probably threw 30 BBs at that thing, but it was great.
That's awesome. All right, next question. Everybody has a bucket list. There's always sometimes the same, sometimes different things on different folks' bucket list, but what is your top bucket list hunt that you have not gotten to do yet?
I think the one that I'm looking forward to the most, and I'm actually trying to work on it now, which is a Canada black bear hunt. Just because I think they're gorgeous animals, and I'd actually written a couple articles on those black bears. I think they would be something amazing to have, on my resume, my hunting resume. So yeah, I'm sure there's better ones, bigger and better ones, but that's the one that's at the front of my mind right now.
That's awesome. That would be an incredible experience for sure.
Yeah.
All right, third and final question, and then we'll wrap it up. I'm going to ask this as it's relevant to me, because this year is my first year managing a new, or being a part of the management, I guess I should say. Myself and our media production manager Nick are both on the piece, but being part of the management on a brand new property, our first year hunting it, it's anybody's first year hunting it. It's raw land. If you have one big piece of advice to give to somebody who is just starting out to manage a new property, what would that piece of advice be?
The major one, which is one I kind of touched on earlier, is to know when to leave it alone. Change might look better to us, but it looks different to the deer, right? So be careful in what you do. Observe before you move, I guess, would be my big piece of advice. Make sure that first year is just taking lots of notes, taking lots of pictures, videos, observing what you can, and then develop a plan and keep those changes small until you have a good understanding of what the effect is going to be. That'd be my advice.
Excellent. Much appreciated. Well, man, thank you for coming on the podcast this week and joining us. I've enjoyed talking to you, and like I said earlier, hearing about the good stuff you're doing up there in Kansas. Thanks for coming on.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
Happy to have you. Guys, thank y'all for listening. Appreciate everybody tuning in. If you have not already, hit that follow and subscribe button on whatever podcast app you are listening to this podcast on. We are on all major podcast platforms, and we are launching a new episode every single week on Monday mornings. So be sure you got your notifications turned on. That way you get notified every time we drop a new one. FallObsession.com is our hub. That's our website where you guys can go to find all of our content, the educational articles, and plenty of those, not just from Tyler, but from all of our staff that we mentioned earlier on there, as well as wild game recipes, video series, product and gear reviews, endorsements, that kind of stuff, and a lot more. So be sure you go to FallObsession.com and check all that out. Our podcast page on that website also has a form on it that you guys can fill out if you want to send us some feedback on our podcast. We much appreciate it. Or if you are interested in being a part of our podcast, either as a guest or a partner, be sure that you reach out to us through that page as well. And then finally, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, those are the socials. Go like and follow and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. We got daily new content on all of those pages relative to hunting in the outdoors and our experiences, and some stuff that should be relevant to you guys as well. So go check us out. Tyler, thanks again, man.
Thanks, Sam. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. All right, guys. Thank y'all for listening, and we will be back with y'all again next week for another Fall Obsession podcast episode. We'll catch y'all then.